Okay, can you hear me, guys? Again, my name is Nada. I am a Palestinian American. With us is Dr. Muhtaseb and Andy Trimlett, the directors and producers of 1948 Catastrophe and Creation. I'll read a little bit about their background and then we'll start the discussion. Andy Trimlett, co-director, executive producer, has a master's degree in Middle East Studies from the University of Washington and a bachelor's degree in International Security and Conflict Resolution from San Diego State University. He has more than a decade of experience in public television, having served as a senior producer, associate producer, editor, and camera operator on a wide range of productions. He has worked on PBS programs in the United States, Hungary, Austria, winning a regional Emmy for a 30-minute documentary he co-produced about property tax law in California. And then Dr. Ahlam Muhtaseb. She's the co-director and executive producer. She's a professor of media studies at California State University, San Bernardino. Her research interests include digital communications, social media, and diasporic communities. She has published her scholarship on digital communication and other communication subtopics and has presented her scholarship to national and international conventions and scholarly meetings. Her most recent project is documentary 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, a film on the year 1948 and its catastrophic consequences, which has originated from her field work in the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. In addition, most of her recent research focuses on digital media and social movements online, cyber activism, and Arab and Muslim images in the media. Welcome, Dr. Muhtaseb and Andy. So in order for this to go smoothly, let's keep the discussion focused on the documentary, the making of the documentary, and the people of the documentary. We're not going to talk about the two-state resolution or peace talks or other religious points like the Exodus. So let's start with your questions, guys, and then I have some talking points to cover. Anyone? Yes, Nasma. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Nasma Toyin. I'm a student at Columbia here in New York. My question is very simple. I'm wondering what the process was like in gathering the interviewees and how you were able to convince them to participate in the documentary and what the process overall was like. Thank you.
You want me to start and then okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us to be with you here. Thank you, People's Forum, for organizing the screening, and especially Nada for her role. We really appreciate it. I would like to start by acknowledging that both Andy and I are joining you from the unceded, colonized indigenous lands of the Komiai First Nation and what is known as San Diego. And I will start, maybe talk about how I started the project before I met Andy, and then how we started working together, and then Andy could take over and talk about interviewing Israelis in particular. So this project came out of my field work in the Palestinian refugee camps. It was a research project that I wanted to conduct, studying cognitive narratology and the role of, narratives or stories in the creation of collective identity, collective memory, collective trauma among Palestinian refugees intergenerationally. So in 2006, I went to Syria first, then Lebanon second, and started working on that. I wanted to do, it's like an oral history project, and I wanted to collect as many stories that I could. And my work, at the same time, I wanted to do a small scale, film, like a classroom resource that, could be used in different classes, that has, those powerful stories, etc. Because that's what, many refugees said, they wanted their voices to be heard. And I went in 2006, started working, as I said, in Syria, then Lebanon, but this is when actually Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006, and my work was interrupted, and I eventually had to leave and go back to the United States. And I was not able to go back to continue working on my project until 2008. But in the meantime, I met Andy, and we started working on a different type of documentary. Hopefully we have the chance to actually discuss how we like around what topic that, like, why we changed the direction of the film. I think it's also an interesting story that Andy probably could tell. So anyway, in 2007 we met, and when he learned I was going back, he approached me and convinced me to change and focus on the year 1948. And as I said, he will explain why. So I started working. I worked mainly in Lebanon in 2008, and I actually collected data or interviews from all refugee camps, all Palestinian refugee camps in Beirut. I tried to go to Nahr al-Bared at that time, but I was not able to. I mean, it was like intricate political situation at that time, and one needed special permission from the army actually to go. I did reach Bai refugee camp, which is kind of outside of Beirut, but that's with the help of the Norwegian Red Cross office. And then, Andy will talk about approaching both Palestinians and Israelis and discuss what we did after that. And sometimes we work together, of course. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, and thank you for being so much better to thank yous than I am. You're very good at it. So as far as the interviews went, it was very different whether we were in, the process is very different whether we're interviewing an Israeli or a Palestinian. So on the Palestinian side, pretty much everybody wanted to tell their story. And so it was really just a matter of finding people from different places that we wanted to make sure we covered. And a lot of that was working with, groups that are really involved in the refugee communities and refugee camps. And so we would find, someone who would kind of take us around and introduce us to these various people. It was not incredibly difficult to get them to talk, except in a few cases. But for the Israelis, as you might guess, it was definitely much more difficult. And so the way we went about that was the bulk of them, I would say, I had planned a trip over there, and I called up two Israelis who worked with me as producers, and I said, I'm going over at this time, and I want to, interview a bunch of people who were around in 1948 and can, are willing to share what happened then. And neither of them knew each other. They weren't working together. They're working independently, but they both called me a few months in, and they said the exact same words almost. They said, I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think we're going to find anyone, because I keep calling people, and the response I always get is, this is something we don't talk about. And I'd already bought my plane ticket, so I was going whether, no matter what. So like, just keep trying, see what you can do. And they kept at it. And I mean, I wish I could tell you there was some secret, but really it was just a lot of work. I ended up reaching out to some people directly that, I had known were involved because they're like more higher profile folks. And at least two of them said, well, I'll do an interview with you if you read my book. So I read their book. And then, it was really just kind of like piece by piece, one person knows somebody who knows somebody kind of thing. And just months and months and months of work to get all those interviews. And that's the bulk of them. There's a few that are kind of exceptions that we can tell more stories about, but why don't we stop talking and take another question?
While we're on this point I want to bring up an important point when you research the Nakba, when you research the 1948 and any of these events, is getting access to the military archives. And you heard in the movie that everything is classified, especially anything about Deir Yassin, which is one of the massacres that happened. So between Andy and Dr. Muhtaseb, Andy, why don't you tell us about your experience with the military archives? I recently watched the Blue Box documentary, and this was the granddaughter of do you mind lowering? Thank you. Thanks. This is the granddaughter of Yosef Weitz. Yosef Weitz is the founder of JNF, and Blue Box is apparently is a box in every Jewish household where you donate money and to buy land in Israel, and it started back in those days. So she said growing up, she thought that her grandfather was just planting trees around the land of Israel. But then you saw in the documentary what he said about cleansing the land and cleansing Palestinians. And one of the things that she mentioned was the difficulty of accessing the archives. Although she's Israeli, she lives there, she's a producer, she makes movies. So tell us more about your experience accessing those archives, Andy.
Yeah, I'll tell you kind of our experience with what we were able to collect, and then I'll toss it to Ahlam, who can tell you more about kind of what's happened since then. I mean, there is a lot that is not available. That said, a lot of what you saw in the documentary just now came directly from Israeli archives. A lot of the photographs, almost all of the photographs, I would say, of soldiers and that sort of thing came from archives. And even some pictures of refugees being forced out of their homes came from archives. So they're not completely closed off, at least they weren't when we were working on this. We collected images and film clips from all sorts of archives around the world, not just Israeli, not just Palestinian, but American, British, etc. There's news agencies and all sorts of folks in there that just even regular people who had a collection in their house, kind of thing. And then the documents, all of those military documents, we sent someone into the Israeli archives, our associate producer, and we had another researcher, both Israeli, who went into the archives and were able to pull those documents out. I think for a lot of them, really the hardest thing is just kind of knowing what to look for. So almost all of those documents that you saw were referenced in, a book of some kind. And so we wanted to see the original and pulled that out. And then they're obviously in Hebrew, all of them. And then so we had our translator translate them for us. And so that's what you saw on screen. That said, we did try very hard to get images from Deir Yassin. There are, as mentioned in the documentary, some unknown number, but it is assumed to be fairly large, collection of photos of from Deir Yassin. There was a photographer there, and those have never been allowed to be released. A number of Israelis have sued in an attempt to get them, and that has failed every time. The classification period is expired, because most things are classified for 50 years, but they keep extending it. And there's also documents that are in the same position from Deir Yassin. So Ahlam, do you want to tell a little bit more about what's been going on since?
Yes. So I think you covered most of what I wanted to talk about, but maybe just give a narrative of the Israeli information law. and how it went from, after the establishment of the State of Israel until now, and how its projection going to be. So, and Israel had its immediately after the state. Actually, Israel does not have a constitution, which some people don't know. They have more of like creationist laws and bylaws. And one of them is the Information Act, actually, that came, I think, in 1949. I can't remember the exact year. And that was aimed to like organize, anything related to information release. And therefore, there was an embargo on most information on the creation of the State of Israel, basically on the years like 1947 to 1949, and anything that was kind of damning for the State of Israel was actually classified. So Israel basically classified the majority of information on the massacres, killing, battles, military orders, you name it. And it wasn't, and the embargo, was for 50 years, as Andy said. So it wasn't, a lot of these materials were not uncovered until the year 1998, after 50 years, of course. So Israel was forced by law to the government to actually declassify a lot of the information that were classified. That actually created a wave of historians that we now know as new Israeli historians like Ahlam, Avi Schleim, and Benny Morris. And they have different perspectives on, what happened in 1948, although they don't necessarily disagree on the facts on the ground, more on the interpretation of the facts based on their political perspective, of course. So you have Benny, Ahlam Pape on the left side of, perspectives, while Benny Morris is on the very far right. But anyway, so either way, I mean, whatever, they wrote about in their books and what they revealed in terms of the atrocities that Israel committed, or not Israel, but, the Zionist militias committed in its attempt to create the state, it was so damning and so embarrassing for the State of Israel that the government actually went back and reclassified a lot of the information it declassified in the first place. Not only this, but actually after legal battles back and forth, they extended the embargo for 70 years. So that would have expired in the year 2019. And this is when the Netanyahu government one more time extended the embargo for 90 years. So another 20 years. So basically, we would never know a lot of the information. We will never see the videos and the photos that we know exist, or the other military orders that people have never seen, although they might have known about them, until the year basically 2038. And that, of course, tells you, like for people who deny the atrocities committed, I mean, the basic question is, what is Israel hiding, right? What is it hiding that it would keep on extending the embargo until, actually, Netanyahu government wanted to make it 100 years, but then they made it 90 years. So it's not much better, but anyway, someone like me might die actually before even know anything or see anything from all these hidden archives. And by the way, I just want to point out that this power of the narrative, this is partly what gives Israel all this power over the narrative, right? Especially in the United States and in the Western world, is this control of information. And the control over information does not include only control of Israeli information or, Zionist information, but also Palestinian information, because the Palestinian National Archives were destroyed twice in 1948 and in 1982 when they invaded Lebanon, and once again either destroyed or looted and hid, whatever the Palestinian Liberation Movement was able to recreate at that time in terms of the Palestinian National Archives. As of whether it's 1948 between or after, even with if you hear about all these raids and they confiscate things from people's houses, from military, anything about militarization, but more than that, a lot of that is actually controlled and hidden by Israel. Since you mentioned one of our collaborators, Andy, Rana Sila was one of our collaborators, and she's an Israeli anti-Zionist, scholar researcher. She actually did a lot of research on that. She came across, by coincidence, a huge amount of diluted, archives from Lebanon in Israeli dungeons, basically. And she produced a documentary called Looted and Hidden. I mean, I have my issues with the documentary, but that's a different story. But she talks, basically about finding them and all these issues of control. And I think, that's mainly it. Again, there are always legal battles in Israeli courts, but so far, the Israeli government had been insistent on hiding, basically, facts from 1948.
Yep, thanks. Next question.
Delphin Chen from Washington, D.C. And congratulations. This is it's just beyond words, and especially as a fellow Husky. And Andy, this is a great job. Congratulations. So I've been to Israel 3 times, and including trip to West Bank, and really out of love of that country. And on my 3rd trip, I'm going to pick up a book from airport. It's Avi Shavit's book. And I read about that. I'm sure you know that, Promised Land. And talk about, in one chapter, talk about the place that you mentioned, that Lida, now they changed name to Law, right? So all this, and it's really a surprise to me to see. So I don't want to get into detail. And my simple question is, I happen to live, just to stay in a hotel next door and run into this. And I cannot say this is a pleasant or unpleasant surprise for me to watch this today. But what have you done to not to make it a surprise for people to view? Is this to be seen in Israel? Is it allowed to be seen in Israel? Has it been widely distributed? And how much we can help to have more people viewing this?
A clarifying question first. You said, how much did you do for this not to be a surprise?
I think he's talking about how is the film distributed?
In other words, actually, I'm after reading Shavit's book, I've been searching for some topics like this, and this will be something I would immediately just go watching, right? But for me, just came here and saw this as a surprise, and so how we can let other people know and get access to it.
Do you want to take it, Andy? I mean, I just want to say that we already screened in Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's Palestine. But anyway, I mean, we worked with progressive Israeli group that actually calls for the decolonization of knowledge on 1948, and it's specifically like it's in the heart of their mission. And they helped us actually with the film. They are called Zokhrot or Dhakirat in Arabic. And it's Palestinian, actually, Israeli group. Again, it's a decolonial, anti-Zionist group. And they screened it at their 1948, what is it called? 1948 millimeter, is that what they call it?
48 millimeter film festival.
48 millimeter, yes. 48 millimeter film festival. And I think they said about 200 to over 200 people watched it. And the problem is, of course, they are a small minority in the Israeli society, and so probably their audience were all like-minded, They said that they were very receptive of the film, and, they had a lot of positive reviews. Beyond that, we have not done, because for me, when we screened, I made sure that I contact Omar Barghouti from BDS movement to make sure we are not in violation of the BDS call, which is boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Like for me, I can't cross a picket line. That's how, for those of you, because you are from the People's Forum, to understand the metaphor. So I couldn't, go against the boycott. And Omar, allowed us actually. He said that Zokhrot is a partner, because of their anti-Zionist stances. Of course, for him, it was very important that we don't screen at a compromised space, meaning, colonized like Palestinian house or originally or building, etc., which we ensured, except last minute they had to change the venue. We didn't have any control over that because they actually got threats. So that's all we know. Do you want to add anything, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the documentary, like, I'll tell you the good part and the we still have work to do part. So the documentary has been screened all over the world in screenings large and small. Some of them small, just a few dozen people. Some of them like hundreds of people. Many throughout the US, but also in the UK. In the Middle East. I think it's been on every continent now except for that really cold one down south. I don't know if they have film screenings in Antarctica. And what we love,
we didn't screen in Latin America, Southern America, which I would love if anyone knows any lead.
I think we have actually. I'd have to confirm that, but anyway, it has been screened in a number of places all over the world. A lot of in a variety of groups, church groups. It's screened in a lot of churches. It's screened in a lot of universities, and in kind of human rights organizations have done a lot of screenings as well. And it's also available for streaming. So it's if you have Tubi, or everybody has Tubi, it's free. You can watch it for free on Tubi if you don't mind commercials. It's on Prime Video, iTunes. It's on Canopy. So if you're part of a university, you can stream it for free. And that's actually probably one of where we get most of our views is through universities, because there are a number of professors around the country who require their students, they screen this documentary in class, and so they're showing it to every one of their classes on the subject. So that's the good news. We would love to have this on television, but so far no one has been willing to touch it, and that has been a struggle. We have a distributor for North America, and they've tried and tried, and it hasn't gotten anywhere. So I think a lot of broadcasters just don't even want to touch this subject, regardless of what your viewpoint is. And that's a huge problem, obviously. So there's still a lot of work to do. And as far as what you can do, I mean, really just tell people about it. If you want to organize a screening, please go for it. You can either go through the website. There's a lot of information about organizing your own screening and getting rights to do that. If financial issues are a problem, just reach out to us on the contact page and we got you. And then the other thing you can do is write reviews of it on Amazon or IMDb or whatever your review place of choice, because there's a bit of a review war going on this documentary. So anything we can do, get on the positive side helps.
Thank you.
Hi, both. First, thank you. Sorry, my name is Jawad Murabit. First, thank you so much for putting this together. I thought it was incredibly well done, and it was really fact-based. My question for you is, how has the Zionist population responded to this video? And how have the Israelis who were part of this documentary responded?
Why don't I start and I'll toss it to you. So we've been called a lot of names. I would say, like, we do have some crazy stories of attempts to shut down the film, and we'll tell you about one right now. By and large, outside of the television issue that I just told you about, we've screened it a lot of places, and it's just been really well received. I think part of it is because the way we present the story, we're not trying to we're not trying to dehumanize people. We're not trying to, like, say it's a he said, she said kind of thing, good people on both sides kind of issue. But but we're also not trying to, beat people over the head with one version of the story. We try to give you like a broad understanding of what happened. So I think that helps. That said, there have been some attempts to shut the documentary down, and I'll set the story up and then let Ahlam tell you the good parts. So we had an organization, or we worked for a little while with a company that does promotion and marketing for human rights focused documentaries, and they have a number of things that they do to just kind of get the documentary out there, and one of them was to enter it into a film festival that screens every year in West Hollywood. The city of West Hollywood has their own human rights film festival, and what happened was they accepted the film, and which was apparently very normal for this company. And then a number of people came forward and complained about it. And so they ended up delaying the screening. And then they put it back on, and then they delayed it again. And they ended up realizing that they couldn't cancel the film. They couldn't actually put a stop to it because the law of West Hollywood did not allow for a film that had been accepted to then be canceled. And so they actually went to city council, and I will now toss to you.
Okay, so I just want to explain that they rescheduled it several times, 3 times actually, and every time there was like a massive pressure campaign against us. What is interesting for me and Andy is that we learned about this from WeHoville. It's like the West Hollywood major newspaper, where they actually attacked the film and said, it was canceled, the filming. All the focus was on me, actually. They never mentioned Andy, but they focused, of course, on the brown woman who shouldn't be trusted to make a film on this topic. And we pushed back. We had also people who supported us, especially for me in academia. I had a lot of people write, even famous names like Robin Kelly from UCLA, or the author of The Lemon Tree, I forgot his name. Anyway, like several professors, prominent professors, even my university actually surprisingly stood by me and sent a letter. So that made them like in a pickle, like we can't stop it, all eyes are on us. There is a civil rights lawsuit brewing if we do, because it's illegal, etc. So eventually the last attempt to cancel the screening was to toss it into the hands of the city council. And because originally the screening was organized by the city staff. So they proposed a crazy legislation saying that all programming, and this was actually part of the human rights speaker series. So it was actually speeches mainly, but sometimes, or talks, sometimes they allowed films to be screened with discussions. So they said, okay, all screening now should be in the hands of the city council. And they had a vote on April 1st. And I was actually in South Africa at that time. And when I came, like my friends and people I know alerted me, they said, and it was again in the WeHoville. So the WeHoville kept on reporting on this issue, sometimes weekly. And again, every time, it was so stressful to have my name always there, accusing me of anti-Semitism and hate and all of these wonderful, descriptions. So I ended up going on April 1st. I didn't want to go, then I ended up going. And I had to sit through 46 people saying that I was hateful, anti-Semitic, and probably they didn't know I was there. The majority of them hadn't seen the film. So they were just mobilized through the Zionist, lobby in the United States to shut it down because we shouldn't see it, a Palestinian did it, etc. And the vote came, we expected the vote, and I talked actually, I had the chance to speak only 2 minutes, but that's fine. The vote we expected would be 3 against the film and 4 changing, the law, and 2 for screening the film and, against changing the law. But we were surprised that one of the council members who originally was cited as against the film surprised us by saying, you know what, I watched the film, and she had to give her Jewish credentials at the beginning, you know, to protect herself, I guess. And then, but she said, you know what, I watched it. Is it a hard film to watch? Yes, it is. Is it anti-Semitic? Absolutely not. Is it hateful? Absolutely not. Is it propaganda? Absolutely not. Like, so she said, it's a tough film to watch, but it's a good film, you know, it's well researched, it's not propaganda, etc. And she sided actually with screening the film and against changing the law. And that changed the whole thing. And we ended up screening April 15th of 2019 to a full house. They did a wonderful publicity eventually for us for free. And there was actually a whole line of, you know, people who were trying to get in. There was a demo outside, but the screen was very successful. In my view, we had actually a wonderful panel of 3 scholars from UCLA and USC, University of Southern California, and University of California, Los Angeles. So I guess it was a success at the end. Very, very stressful. I have to tell you, for me, it was super stressful. There were other attempts, you know. So we felt like every time the screening was organized by a major entity, you know, like a college or university or city, like, you know, city of West Hollywood, etc. This is when all the pressure came in. They really didn't want to make it mainstream. When it was screened by students, student groups like SJP, PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement, Students for Justice in Palestine, you know, small groups, churches, they didn't care much. They focused on mainstream institutions, including my university. When my university screened at the Palm Desert campus, you know, we have a campus at Palm Desert, all hell broke loose, as they say. You know, they put so much pressure on the associate dean that he told me afterwards he had to go to lunches and dinners with them to mend things, because they didn't, of course, listen to them, and they let the screening go and the discussion. And we had a full house again with actually people we wanted to come and see, that they didn't know anything, you know, like, as I told Andy, I've never seen so many rich white people in the audience, because that's Palm Desert. And they all came, I mean, not all, but many of them came and said, thank you. Thank you. I'm happy I came and watched it. It's not what they said it would be. Anyway, so that's like a sliver of what we had to.
Before we move on, I want to talk about Tantura documentary. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it came out in December 2022. And the backlash that guy suffered was for like 20 years. So he's an Israeli,
Yes.
I think journalist or reporter. He was doing his master's degree, and he interviewed soldiers and a couple of Palestinians from Tantura. Tantura is now a beach. It's called Dor Beach. It showed up. It's one of the places that they changed the names, but they were real accounts and they were stories, just like Andy and Ahlam's documentary. But he was taken to court, and they dropped him out. Watch the documentary. It's called Tantura. And then back like recently, someone came, also Israelis. They went and they viewed they listened to all the tapes and everything. And he basically had like 3 or 4 strokes, and mainly because of this issue. But thankfully, you guys here in the States, you are able to screen it, and you didn't face that same ending. Next question before.
Hi, thank you so much. Earlier, you said that you were going to talk about why you decided to focus on 1948 instead of what you were doing before. So I'm wondering if you can tell that story, and if there's future projects. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll toss it to Andy. He has a compelling story to tell you. He was the one who convinced me.
So I got my master's degree in Middle East Studies. And while I was getting my degree, I studied, obviously, this conflict a lot. And I knew the history, the people, the places, all the stuff you're supposed to know to pass the test. And but I really didn't like once I graduated, I couldn't tell you that I got it. Like I really could make sense of what was going on in Palestine. And I don't know that I could really explain why it was continuing year after year, decade after decade, until I started really digging into the year 1948. And that's when it all clicked. It all suddenly makes sense. Not just the history, but what's going on today, from home demolitions to building the wall to bulldozing, everything started to make sense for me once I looked at it through the lens of 1948. And I realized that if I had gone through an entire master's program and still couldn't wrap my head around it, the average person in the US watching CNN or Fox or whatever really had no chance whatsoever to make sense of this conflict. And so I decided that somebody had to make a documentary about this. And when we started, I said, this is going to be the biggest project I've ever worked on in my life. I won't be done until late next year. And I was off by 9 years. But we eventually finished and brought you the documentary that you just saw. We ended up doing 90 interviews in 7 different countries. As I mentioned, we collected 2,000 archival images and film clips, and we also did about 20,000 pages of research to bring this to you. And then the hardest part was really to boil that all down to 1 hour and 26 minutes, so it was watchable. So that's what we did.
That was more challenging. Future projects, we work on separate things, but this got a toll on us. It wasn't easy, and we couldn't get funding. Funding was a huge issue for us also. But we have a lot of materials that we are thinking of, employing for educational purposes, definitely, like releasing full interviews online, which we have done 12 of those, things like that nature.
But anyone, like if you are at all interested in doing a project, I don't know that I would recommend a project like this to start if you've never done a documentary before. But if you're interested in telling stories and you'd like some advice, or you want to figure out where to get started, please reach out. Just you can go to our website 1948movie.com and just fill out the contact form. It goes straight to me, so I can answer any questions you have. We often meet with people to just give advice or share ideas or whatever. So if you want to do a documentary on 1967, we would be more than happy to help in any way we can.
And actually, we just collaborated with the producers from Vox on their newly released documentary on Nakba. I don't know if anyone saw that. It's a 16 minutes short story. So I had several meetings actually with one of their producers who worked on it. And then, Andy and I released to them a lot of our materials that they used in that short documentary. It's a good one, actually.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm Tom Gogan from Brooklyn, and I've been generally aware, of the Nakba for a bunch of years, but to see and hear the actual people involved from, all sides of that conflict is really powerful. One of the things that I thought as I was watching the film, and you do reference it briefly, the role of the, we'll call them the so-called great powers, the UK, United States, other countries that did not go mentioned, but probably part of whatever, NATO, or whatever. So I'm curious if that is one of the possible next projects. Seems like the run-up to 1948 is probably about as important as what happened in 1948. So that's a question, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. The original version of this documentary, when we did our first cut, was I think 2.5 hours long. Everybody goes, "Oh, I really want to see the long version," and trust me, you don't. But it did include a lot more information on like the 1936 Arab Revolt and kind of everything that came before this, including very early. Yeah, had a lot more information on very early Zionist attempts and successful attempts to take Palestinian land away from Palestinians. And yeah, absolutely. This couldn't have happened without the the US and the UK especially playing a major role in pushing it forward. I think one thing that I do think is interesting, I did a Q&A recently actually in my hometown with Farid Abdel-Noor, who is in the documentary. He's the bald guy at the very end, and he was actually a professor of mine at San Diego State University. He's brilliant. And he pointed out that the United States, while the United States did support the UN resolution in 1947, we were not blindly pro-Israel back then. In 1956, the British and the French joined with Israelis to start a war, and Eisenhower stepped in and basically said the diplomatic equivalent of "knock that off right now," and in very clear terms was not pro-Israel in that. It wasn't until 1967 that we really shifted and basically approved everything that the Israelis did. So we do have a long history, but I think it's sometimes missed that there was a time when it wasn't like that in America, and we treated people a little bit more with equality, and hopefully we can get back to that. So Ahlam has a lot to say on this too, I know.
No, I think it covered everything, honestly, and I can't think of what else to add. I mean, Truman is what brought me to the United States on a Fulbright scholarship. That's I could add, because I actually was doing my master's at Birzeit University, my first master's, and I came across, it was the class on the American actually involvement in the Palestinian struggle, and creating the conflict and creating the state of Israel. And this is when I did a paper on Truman. And this is when actually the Jewish lobby in the United States that was supportive, of course, of the Zionist idea started actually forming strongly. And they played a role, putting pressure on the Truman government, of course, with a lot of promises of support for his re-election campaign. So he did play a role, although he knew what he was doing was not fair. He knew about the plight of the Palestinians. He even called his lobbyist friend son of a bitch. Actually, he used those terminology. But at the end of the day, it was the Truman government that put pressure on the United Nations that was newly actually formed. Put pressure on many countries to vote to support the partition plan. We discuss it in the film, not maybe as extensively as we should, and talk about its detrimental effects, but that was a very unfair plan, of course, and it really paved the way for the establishment of the state. And also the fact that the Truman government was the first, or the United States was the first country to officially recognize the new state, to the extent that when those who worked in the lobby office, they went to the White House with the Declaration of Independence to hand it to the president to sign the recognition. At that time, they didn't even know what the state was called, because we're talking about hours after the declaration. And then a secretary got actually effects from, or whatever they used to call it, maybe not effects, but something similar from the Israeli side, saying that the state is now Israel. And so she actually rushed to the White House and met them at the gate before they went in, the delegation, and scratched the Jewish state, the words Jewish state, and added Israel in handwriting to the declaration. So that tells you also that there was, a lot of support for the establishment. Eisenhower was really the only probably time where the U.S. role was, different, as Andy said. But, after that, it went downhill. And it's still going downhill, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Can I say, because you said that Tantura, I just want to say there is another important film called Born in Deir Yassin. I don't want to forget that because it's on my mind. Both films were made by Israelis, and honestly, I have a lot of critique as a media studies professor of the exclusion, for example, of Palestinian narratives, etc. But I think as you said, Nada, the testimonies of the Israelis in both films are so important to view and witness, and they are even more disturbing than what you saw tonight. That's why I always, say that we have to go back and watch these films. Tantura, by the way, was appropriated from its original filmmaker, who is Palestinian.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. She's a friend of mine, and I have been working with her on her film for years now. And it's just so sad that they approached her and wanted to make the film with her, the Israeli filmmakers, and she refused. And they kind of basically appropriated her film. Is done, it's in the final stages. And it's sad, at least her film actually represents the Palestinian narrative strongly, not only the Israeli one. But anyway, hopefully she still gets it out. Hala Jibril is her name.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Salma. My question's for Dr. Muhtaseb. What was your experience like in academia after coming out with a film like this? I know you mentioned your university stood by you in the case of the film festival, but I imagine there's probably been instances where your university hasn't stood by you or has maybe taken action. So I'd love to hear more about your experience.
Thank you for the question. Well, the film came out when I was tenured associate professor and almost, about to be promoted to full professor. So in academia, if you have tenure, you are protected to a great extent. I mean, nobody can really fire you or harm you based on your point of view or what is considered part of your academic freedom in terms of knowledge production. So in a way, I was protected in general, regardless of the university's administration. I think my school is different than other schools in the fact that we don't have strong Zionist presence on our campus. And because unfortunately, we don't have also a strong Palestinian presence because I'm struggling to keep SJP, the SJP chapter alive on our campus. And it's very hard because I have to always find students who are willing to take on the responsibility. But in a way, I think that played a role in really reducing the attacks on me. But that actually didn't mean that I didn't have attacks from colleagues. I have one of my colleagues from the math department who actually served in the Israeli army at one point. And she had, for 20 years, been always against me, always, going to the administration, complain about event planning, actually, maybe more than the film, because I've had 20 years of event planning around Palestine, and I don't shy away from any event, I don't self-censor. So I had, all kinds of events, from film screenings to talks to book, discussions. And I always center Palestinian voices, of course, all voices, but mainly Palestinian voices when it comes to Palestine. And she would always she and a few others, complain against me, but thankfully I didn't have any major backlash. However, in my own department, I do have actually backlash, and I don't know if it's because of the film or because of my work or for Palestine, or is it just honestly at the end of the day racism against people of color. And this is how I see it, more than just Palestine. Like I feel, being a diversity advocate for campus for several years, I was hired as the diversity advocate, to promote and help in diverse recruitments. I got a lot of lashback against that, and that tells you that the Palestinian cause is intersectional with other causes. We are part actually of the bigger, oppression, phenomena around the world, not only in the United States, but basically our cause is very interconnected with other causes. And when you think of collaboration and when you work on diversity, like for our campus, I've always promoted diversity in terms of having, faculty whose experiences are similar to our students who are 65% Latinx, right? Or having more Black faculty. We have 0 Black faculty, for example, in my department. Like when we talk about these issues that are very connected, of course, in the bigger scale of things to the Palestinian oppression, then in my department, at least, I felt that was I was accused just very recently, you won't believe it, in a formal email of de-whitening the department. I mean, they used the word a Trump-like, white supremacist language of de-whitening the department. And that had been actually very, very aggressive. And it might be, as I said, the intersectionality of all this work, because my work for social justice extends Palestine. Palestine is a central part, but I work on other causes. I work with Black Lives Matter. I work with Union Del Barrio on immigration issues as a scholar activist. And I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to have this hostility against me for that work. I don't know. I hope I answered your question, but this is how it has been.
I think we are over time. Any other questions? Okay, if anyone, I'll just give a few recommendations if you want to read or learn more about the Nakba and the important dates. There's a book that came out a couple of years ago by Dr. Rashid Khalidi, and they interviewed him in the movie. And it's called the 100-Year War on Palestine. It covers 1917 to 2017, and you'll learn about the major events in that period. And then Ilan Pappy's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, of course. If you're interested in more documentaries, I actually watch for the they have at the Palestine Museum. They screen almost every weekend different documentaries and things about Palestine. But first of all, yes, yeah, and it's online. They started it during COVID, and they just continued the program. Okay, I would like to thank Dr. Muhtaseb and Andy for sharing this great movie with us. And I would like to thank the People's Forum for accepting and allowing us to screen it. Thank you, guys, and thank you for sharing your evening with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.